There are always two truths in the forest, the one adults seek and the one only children find. On 2nd May 2025, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan woke up in their home on Garlock Road in Nova Scotia, Canada, played in the kitchen for a while, and then disappeared forever. No screams, no struggle, no traces on the ground, only Lily's pink blanket, torn in two, one piece in a garbage bag near the house, the other hanging from a tree a mile away, as if someone had deliberately left a mark. 6 months later, the police, dogs, drones, and hundreds of volunteers still hadn't found a single bone, shoe, or hair. 80 years earlier, on 4th of November 1945, 5-year-old Elaine Long went out into the Australian bush. It disappeared for 3.5 days. Thousands searched for her and found her alive 50 miles from home, clean, almost unscathed, leaning calmly against a tree and asking, "Where's Mommy?" One child was swallowed up by the forest, leaving her parents with only a torn blanket and eternal silence. Another was led through rain, thorns, and night, as if an invisible hand were guiding her by the elbow and bringing her into the light. 2 stories, 2 continents, 80 years apart. The same chilling question. When a child crosses the invisible line between home and the forest, who decides whether they will return or stay there forever? On the 2nd May 2025, in the small rural community of Lansdowne Station in Pictou County, Nova Scotia, Canada, an event occurred that remains one of the most mysterious and disturbing stories of child disappearances in the country's modern history. 6-year-old Lily Sullivan, born in March 2019, and her 4-year-old brother Jack Sullivan, born on 29th of October 2020, disappeared without a trace from their home on Garlock Road early in the morning. The children lived with their biological mother, Malahi Brooks Murray, their stepfather, Daniel Martell, and their 1-year-old half-sister Meadow, in a rural area surrounded by dense forest, steep slopes, and impenetrable thickets. The day before their disappearance, on 1st May 2025, the family was seen at a Dollarama store in the neighboring town of New Glasgow at 2:25 p.m. Surveillance cameras captured Lily and Jack with their mother, stepfather, and younger sister. This was the last confirmed sighting of the children outside their home. According to Martell's testimony, both children stayed home from school on Thursday, 1st May, because Lily had a cough. They were also absent from school on 30th April due to teacher professional development. On the evening of 1st May, Brooks Murray put the children to bed. She initially told police that this happened at 9:00 p.m., but later changed her statement to 10:00 p.m. She also stated that Martell did not go to bed immediately after her, and that she did not know exactly when he entered the bedroom. On the morning of 2nd May, at 6:15 a.m., Brooks Murray marked the children as absent from school due to illness. Between 8 and 9:40 a.m. on 2nd May, according to Martell and Brooks Murray, they were both in the bedroom with their 1-year-old daughter, Meadow. The couple claimed that Lily went in and out of the bedroom several times and that Jack could be heard in the kitchen. Shortly thereafter, they stopped hearing either child and never saw them again. Brooks Murray said that Martell had placed a wrench on top of the front door the night before. It had not been disturbed, so Martell assumed that the children must have left through the rear sliding door, which usually opened silently. They said they began searching for the children outside, calling their names. Martell's mother, Jenny McKenzie, who lived in a separate building on the same property, reported that she fell asleep around 8:50 a.m. and woke up to her dog barking. She then heard Jack and Lily playing on the swing set and laughing in the backyard before falling back asleep. At 10:01 a.m., Brooks Murray called 911 to report Jack and Lily missing. It was reported that Lily was likely wearing a pink sweater, pink pants, and pink boots, while Jack was wearing blue boots with dinosaurs on them. The police arrived at the scene at 10:27 a.m. At 12:25 p.m. on 2nd May, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police issued a statement informing the public of the disappearance and urging anyone with information to come forward. At that time, police stated their belief that the children had left home and that there was no evidence of abduction. At 4:55 p.m., the police issued an update stating that a vulnerable missing person alert had been issued for Pictou County. At 12:45 p.m. on the 3rd May, Brooks Murray called the police to report that the children's estranged biological father, Cody Sullivan, may have taken the children across the border to New Brunswick. The police response to this call included a visit to Sullivan's home at 2:50 a.m., where he stated that he had not seen Jack or Lily in 3 years. The police later requested video footage from cameras at the Cobequid Pass Toll Plaza, located on the Trans-Canada Highway, en route to New Brunswick. On 3rd of May, police and volunteers numbering at least 100 searched the area around the children's home using ground searches, dogs, drones, and helicopters. The children's mother, Malahia Brooks Murray, told CTV News that she still hopes the children will be found, saying, "We just want them to come home as soon as possible." By 4th of May, the number of people involved in the search had reached 160, according to Royal Canadian Mounted Police Staff Sergeant Curtis McKeon. On 7th of May, police announced that the search for the missing children had been scaled back, with Staff Sergeant McKinnon stating that there had been no confirmed sightings of the children and that it was unlikely they were still alive. One of the few pieces of physical evidence found during the investigation was a pink blanket. On 7th of July 2025, the Royal Mounted Police reported that it was conducting forensic tests on a pink blanket found during a search of heavily wooded areas near the children's home. The police stated at the time that the family had confirmed that the blanket belonged to Lily. Documents released later shed more light on this part of the investigation, reporting that 3 family members found the blanket in a tree on Lansdowne Station Road on 2nd of May, exactly 1 mile from the family home. The photograph was shown to the mother and stepfather, who confirmed that it was Lily's blanket. The police later sent a service dog to the area where the blanket was found, but the animal was unable to pick up the scent of Lily or Jack. On 4th of May, police seized another piece of the blanket after it was found inside a garbage bag at the end of the children's driveway. Police confirmed that both pieces were part of the same blanket. Documents show that the police received hundreds of tips about the case, including one from a witness who reported that on the morning of 2nd May, while traveling with her sons, she saw 2 children walking along the side of the road. Natasha Haywood reported to the Royal Mounted Police on 31st May. She described seeing a young girl holding a young boy's hand. The boy had dirty blonde hair and was wearing shorts, while the girl had dark hair and pigtails and was wearing a t-shirt with blue ties. According to the police, she said the children were walking toward a white woman in her 50s or 60s with loose curls, who was waiting next to the passenger side of an old brown or gold sedan with the rear door open. Documents say that in early June, police met with the witness near the corner of Garlock Road and Lansdowne Station Road, where she mentioned seeing the children walking north toward Westville, Nova Scotia, and that the car appeared to be waiting for them. When she later met with police, Haywood said she thought the girl was about 9 or 10 years old and the boy was 5. Investigators are working to determine whether the children were indeed Jack and Lily. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police conducted at least 4 polygraph tests during the investigation. The first 2 were performed on 12th of May with the children's parents at the Bible Hill Detachment in Nova Scotia. Martella's polygraph indicated that he was telling the truth, as did the test for Brooks Murray, which showed that she was telling the truth when answering specific questions. A comment by an unidentified investigator included at the end of the section on the results of both polygraphs states, "At this time, the investigation into the disappearance of Jack and Lily is not considered to be criminal in nature." On 10th of June, the children's step-grandmother, Jenny McKenzie, underwent a polygraph test. Still, another document notes that her physiology was not suitable for analysis, and no opinion was rendered on the polygraph test. The children's biological father, Cody Sullivan, took a polygraph test on 12th of June 2025 and passed, with his answers deemed truthful. On 11th of June, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police provided an update on the case, stating that their intensive approach to the investigation was continuing. The police agency clarified that the investigation may take longer than they had hoped, and that they are considering all possible scenarios and cooperating with agencies across the country. The agency revealed key details of the ongoing investigation, including that hundreds of hours of video footage of the area surrounding the disappearance site had been collected, that they had formally interviewed 54 people in connection with the investigation, including conducting polygraph tests, and that many of the 488 tips they had received were evaluated. On 18th of May, the renewed search was conducted with 115 volunteers and police personnel. In August 2025, redacted court documents related to the case were released following a request for information filed on behalf of the Globe and Mail, CBC News, and Canadian Press. The documents revealed that as of 16th of July, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police no longer considered the case to be criminal in nature. In November 2025, more than 6 months after their disappearance, the search continues. The volunteer search organization Please Bring Me Home, based in Owen Sound, has joined the search for the missing Sullivan children. Nick Aldridge, co-founder of the organization, called the case of the missing Sullivan children unusual. He said that, seeing how dense the woods are near the Sullivan family's home, he believes the children may be there, despite extensive search efforts. Royal Canadian Mounted Police search dogs have searched a total of more than 25 miles in the area where the children were reported missing. The case has attracted widespread attention across Canada and internationally, due to the unusual circumstances surrounding the disappearance. As of October 2025, the Nova Scotia government is offering a reward of up to $150,000 for information deemed to be of investigative value in the search for the missing siblings. None of the tips have yet led to the location of Jack and Lily, and no information has been confirmed by the investigation, the document notes. Despite all the efforts of the police, volunteers, service dogs, helicopters, drones, and expert search teams, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack have never been found. Their disappearance remains one of the most disturbing and mysterious stories in modern Canadian criminology. On 4th of November 1945, a little girl disappeared from her parents' sight in just 15 minutes in the depths of the Australian countryside. At that moment, the locals and visitors to the village had no idea that they were about to witness one of the most significant child search operations in history, which ended in an absolute miracle. Elaine Long, aged 5, found herself at the center of national attention. The story began early in the morning when her parents let her out to play in the yard, only to notice her disappearance 15 minutes later. From the very first hour, the search was organized not according to protocol, but in a way that only happens in small communities. Neighbors dropped what they were doing, and the entire population took to the trail. By noon, not only locals but also farmers from neighboring villages had arrived at the Longs' house, and together they combed the area, but the first day ended without success. The weather did not help. Heavy rain thoroughly washed away the traces of small shoes, which, as trackers later discovered, were the only clue for the search. By evening, the search operation had become large-scale. Australians are a united people, especially when everything happens in a remote village. The search continued throughout the night, with groups of rescuers walking across the wet ground with flashlights, each hoping to hear a child's voice. The lights in the houses were turned off in solidarity with the family, and even city services, upon receiving the news, began preparing equipment and personnel. By dawn on 5th of November, the number of search participants exceeded 300, and 40 horsemen arrived from different areas. Details emerged. Traces were found near the house, likely belonging to the child, but they were so confused on the wet ground that even the native tracker, Alf Ryan, acknowledged the difficulty of the task. The police called in a private plane to survey the area from the air. Still, the landscape proved too complex for quick aerial reconnaissance. The trails led into thickets where any branch could hide anything. The area around Elaine's house shifted westward, where there was thick bush. The tracks ran parallel to the creek bed, but every few feet they disappeared into the wet grass. Locals noted that they had never seen so many people in the area. Even shops and schools closed so that no one would be distracted from the primary task. It was this coming together of people that became the defining feature of the day. Hundreds ate on the go so as not to interrupt the search, bringing food to one another to make the collective effort more efficient. On the third day, authorities from neighboring regions joined the operation. Police, volunteers, and people from towns within a 60-mile radius. The number of participants exceeded 1,000, and new equipment appeared. Loudspeakers mounted on cars and special jeeps for rough terrain, which had never been used in such searches before. Everyone tried to follow the line strictly so as not to miss the child if she was lying in the bushes. As it turned out later, at that moment, Elaine was already far beyond the search area. The girl, without the help of adults, covered a considerable distance in 3.5 days, moving chaotically. Her tracks were found near a stream, then on dry land, and suddenly appeared closer to the road. In some places it was recorded that Elaine walked 1.5 to 2 miles per night, completely disoriented, which was remarkable for a child her age. From 6th of November, the weather improved slightly, and the search teams were finally able to move without rain, marching in a chain through the bushes. At this point, the police tried a new tactic. Everyone moved strictly among the thickets, not missing a single blade of grass. Elaine's trails were so confusing that even experienced trackers had difficulty figuring out the directions. However, by evening, a searcher noticed a small figure in the distance by a tree. This scene was included in all reports and eyewitness accounts. Elaine Long stood leaning against a tree, completely calm despite 3 days without food and constant, heavy physical exertion. She walked up to the rescuer herself, did not cry, but simply asked quietly, "I want my mom." She was found 8 miles from home, near a stream, where trackers could barely make out old footprints. Medics immediately took the child to the clinic. Despite the grueling journey, Elaine was physically unharmed. She had only minor scratches and blisters on her feet, and her clothes were dirty but not seriously damaged. The doctors noted the girl's remarkable calmness and asked her parents not to disturb her with unnecessary questions. Elaine was in a state of mild stress but showed no fear. At that moment, the investigation began. How could a 5-year-old child survive alone for so long, walk 50 miles across rough terrain, and avoid serious injuries or dangerous encounters? Judging by her story and an analysis of her tracks, Elaine drank water from puddles, moved mainly during the day, lay under a tree, or hid in the bushes at night, and never strayed far from water. She heard the voices of searchers several times but was afraid to go towards the sound for fear of getting even more lost. Later, it became known that on the third day, fresh tracks were spotted from an airplane a few miles from the main search area. However, only the ground team happened to be in that location and was able to find the girl herself. This moment revealed the shortcomings of the old search pattern. Even if the direction is chosen correctly, a child walking chaotically can easily exceed the densest search chain, which is why Elaine's case is often cited as a reason to change rescue operation methods. Hospital records showed that the girl did not suffer from severe dehydration, thanks to the rain and her ability to navigate the countryside. She did not suffer from hypothermia, even though nighttime temperatures dropped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. When she was first given water and food, Elaine eagerly ate bread and milk and asked for ice cream, surprising the hospital staff. Elaine later recalled this episode with a smile. The most difficult moments remained in her memory as a regular walk. The police noted the child's remarkable character traits, endurance, calmness, and the ability to make decisions under stress. According to tracker Alf Ryan, her behavior was unique. Most children, when they find themselves in the forest, become frightened and sit still, but Elaine moved constantly, choosing places to rest that could protect her from the rain and wind. After this incident, Elaine's family became actively involved in educational projects, helping to recommend new approaches to searching for missing children in Australia. Soon, this case was included in reports as an exceptional example of survival. A 5-year-old child traveling 50 miles across rough terrain is recognized as one of the most remarkable cases in history. This story was discussed at the national level, and decades later, it was added to a series of training materials for rescuers. Elaine Long remained under medical supervision for a long time, but no serious injuries were found. 2 weeks later, she was discharged, and her family took her to her grandmother's house to recover from her ordeal. In a photograph taken on the day she returned home, her eyes are wide open in surprise. Doctors noted that this effect often appears after prolonged, stressful situations in missing children. Rescuers and search operation participants were awarded commendations, and the council recommended tracker Alf Ryan for an award for his exceptional work. Locals noted that it was their joint efforts and mutual support during the days of distress that laid the foundation for success. No one remained indifferent or left until the last trace was found. The case of Elaine Long is still controversial, even among experienced anomaly researchers and proponents of paranormal theories. Here is a selection of facts and oddities that have led to hypotheses about unusual interference or unexplained phenomena. The first thing many search experts pointed out was that the 5-year-old girl had walked about 50 miles in 3.5 days, in severe weather and across rough, dangerous terrain, with rain falling most of the time. According to the trackers, her tracks were found in the most unexpected places. Sometimes it seemed that she was zigzagging back and forth, covering many miles in a matter of hours, which seems incredible for a child of that age and physical development. Second, when Elaine was found, it turned out that her body had almost no serious injuries, minor scratches, blisters on her feet, but not a single severe wound or cut from thorny bushes and sharp branches, which are abundant in the Australian bush. The searchers were amazed that even an adult would not have been able to walk the specified route in such a short time, and without serious harm to their health. This detail gave rise to the first wave of theories about protection from above, or paranormal influence, as if someone or something had helped the child. Third, the girl showed virtually no signs of dehydration, even though, according to medical calculations, a 5-year-old child in the field without sufficient water supplies is at risk of irreversible changes after just 48 hours. Doctors suggested that Elaine survived on puddles after rain. Still, even this strategy usually does not save a person from exhaustion on the 4th day. Phenomenal physical endurance, or invisible help, one of the versions that is still being discussed. Police reports record that searchers allegedly saw the girl several times from a distance. Still, when they approached, the traces disappeared. The sound of their voices faded away. This sparked discussion among paranormal enthusiasts, who claimed that the sudden disappearances of the child's tracks or movements were too frequent and illogical for a standard search. Hypotheses continue to appear on the internet. Could Elaine have been the subject of an anomaly zone that affected her perception of space, or could she have encountered a mystical guide? Figures from the archives show that in similar disappearances, ordinary 5-year-old children almost always hide, avoid movement, and rarely stray more than 4 miles from their starting point. Elaine walked more than 8 miles in a straight line through rugged bushland, and her tracks show she covered a total of 50 miles, staying on course and choosing her direction even in poor visibility. There is also a rare legend that for centuries, people in this region have told stories of invisible guides, animals or spirit people who could lead children out of the thicket or prevent them from dying. Elaine's appearance by the tree in a completely calm state, without fear or panic, sparked another wave of discussion. Psychiatrists still cannot explain the extreme stability of such a little girl's nervous system after 3 days of complete isolation, a stressful situation, and the absence of adults. Some paranormal researchers attribute this to the phenomenon of the so-called borderline experience, when a person in a critical situation finds themselves in an altered state of consciousness or psychologically protected. The most striking confirmation of the anomaly is the final medical assessment. The child did not suffer from hypothermia, malnutrition, or severe injuries, even though she was left practically alone in the wild. Officially, all the reasons for her survival were explained away as coincidences: recent rains, luck, and a determination unheard of in an ordinary child. But from the point of view of supporters of anomalous hypotheses, there are clearly events here that have not been fully explained. That is why today the case of Elaine Long is cited not only as a medical and criminal miracle, but also as a topic of discussion in ufological, anomalous, and research communities in Australia and around the world. Many are convinced that this case, like many other invisible phenomena of the Australian bush, will not receive a comprehensive explanation for a long time to come. Two stories, two continents, 8 decades apart. In one, children disappeared forever, leaving behind only silence and strange marks in the forest. In the other, a child went through hell and came out unscathed, as if someone invisible had led her by the hand. One story ends with the forest taking them away. The other ends with the forest letting them go. But both leave the same question that still sends a chill down the spine of anyone who has ever let a child go into the forest. What really happens to children when adults can no longer see them? In the mountains of North America, people disappear differently than in cities or fields. Here, disappearance is instantaneous and complete. An experienced hunter leaves in the morning with his rifle, and 5 days later, he is found half naked at an altitude he could not have physically climbed to. A 2-year-old child disappears from his own yard, and a day later is found alive 12 miles from home, on a slope that not every adult could climb without a rope. A German physicist who came to study magnetic anomalies leaves his car with documents and disappears without a trace in the Utah desert. These are not crimes. They are not animals, not accidents in the usual sense. These are 3 real stories in which everything we know about survival, physiology, and common sense ceases to apply. And to this day, no one has been able to explain what exactly happens to people in these places, and why the mountains sometimes return them, but not quite as they left. On 8 October 1999, 51-year-old Jeffrey Storms went moose hunting in the Rutt National Forest in northern Colorado. Jeffrey, a Denver-based hunter with 30 years of experience, made this trip every year with 2 friends, a ritual they had observed for the past 15 years. The men planned to spend a week in the mountains near the Wyoming border, at an elevation of about 10 to 200 feet, hunting elk during their migration season. Jeffrey worked as a civil engineer, was married, and had 2 adult daughters. Friends and colleagues knew him as a cautious, methodical man who prepared carefully for each trip. He studied topographic maps, checked the weather forecast, and always took spare equipment. In 30 years of hunting, he had never been in a dangerous situation. He knew the mountains, respected nature, and followed safety rules. Early Saturday morning was clear and cold. The temperature was around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was cloudless and the wind was light. Jeffrey and his 2 friends had breakfast by their truck at their makeshift base, a small clearing in the forest where they had set up camp the night before. The plan for the day was standard: split up and comb the area in different directions, tracking moose tracks and looking for animals. This tactic increased the chances of a successful hunt by allowing them to cover a larger area. Around 7 in the morning, the 3 hunters set off in different directions. Jeffrey took his rifle, a reliable model he had been hunting with for many years, spare ammunition, a knife, a compass, a thermos of hot coffee, and several energy bars. He was dressed in a warm hunting jacket, sweater, shirt, thermal underwear, and sturdy hiking boots. The three agreed to meet at the truck at noon, regardless of whether the hunt was successful. Jeffrey headed northeast up a wooded slope. His friends went in other directions. Around 9 in the morning, one of his friends heard a distant shot. Perhaps Jeffrey had found an elk. That was the last contact with him. Around 11 in the morning, the weather changed dramatically. The sky suddenly darkened, the wind picked up, and the temperature began to drop rapidly. Within 20 minutes, the temperature fell from 45 degrees to 28 degrees. Snow began to fall. Not a light drizzle, but a heavy snowfall with large flakes. Visibility dropped to a few dozen feet. Jeffrey's two friends, who were in different parts of the forest, immediately began to return to the truck. They were experienced hunters and knew that sudden snowstorms in the Colorado mountains were dangerous and unpredictable. Soaked and frozen, they reached base camp by 12:30. Jeffrey was not there. They waited, periodically firing shots into the air, a signal that was supposed to direct Jeffrey to the meeting place. There was no response. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the snowfall had intensified. The temperature continued to drop. The friends decided to go for help. One stayed with the truck, keeping the fire going and periodically firing shots into the air. The other drove to the nearest ranger station, which took about an hour on the slippery forest roads. By 4 in the afternoon, a team of rangers was on site. However, the conditions were hazardous for a search operation. The snow was falling steadily, visibility was limited to 50 feet, and the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind had picked up to 30 miles per hour. The captain of the search party decided to postpone a full-scale search until morning. Working in such conditions at night was too dangerous for the rescuers themselves. It was a painful night for Jeffrey's friends. They knew their comrade was out there somewhere in the blizzard, possibly injured, possibly lost. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. The snow continued to fall. Even with warm clothing and equipment, the chances of survival in such conditions without shelter were low. At dawn on Sunday, the snowfall eased, though it did not stop completely. The temperature remained around 20 degrees. 19 search and rescue teams from different parts of Colorado arrived at the scene. The area was divided into sectors. Jeffrey's friends indicated the approximate direction in which he had gone. The teams began a systematic search. By noon, 4 search dogs with handlers had been brought in. The dogs were given Jeffrey's clothes from his belongings in the truck to sniff. All 4 dogs, 3 German Shepherds and a Labrador, picked up the scent and began moving northeast from base camp, through thick forest and up the slope. The snow that had fallen over the past day covered the ground in a layer about 8 inches thick, but the dogs could still smell the trail. They confidently led the guides through the forest for about 1.5 miles. Then the forest began to thin out, and the team emerged onto a vast rock field, an area of bare granite boulders and ledges stretching for several hundred yards. At the edge of the rock field, all 4 dogs suddenly stopped. Their behavior changed dramatically. They began to circle in place, sniffing the snow and rocks, whining, long, anxious whines. All attempts by the guides to direct the dogs further across the rock field were unsuccessful. The animals refused to continue working, lying down in the snow with their tails tucked between their legs. One of the dog handlers, with 20 years of experience, later explained, "The trail clearly led to the rocky field, but the dogs categorically refused to go there. This is unusual behavior. Usually, if the trail is lost on the rocks, the dogs simply cannot pick it up again, but they do not show such anxiety." Search teams searched the rocky field by hand. Climbers checked the crevices between the boulders and areas hidden by snow. They checked all possible places where a person could conceal or fall. Nothing was found. The search continued throughout Sunday and Monday. The helicopter was unable to take off due to continuing snowfall and low clouds. More than 100 people combed the forest and mountains, checking every area within a 5-mile radius of Jeffrey's last known location. On Tuesday, the weather began to improve. The snowfall stopped and the temperature rose to 30 degrees. The snow started to melt. The helicopter finally took off, flying over the area and looking for any signs of human presence. From above, they could see the tracks left by the search teams, but no other signs. On Wednesday, the 5th day after his disappearance, a group of tourists unrelated to the search operation was climbing one of the popular routes a few miles from the search area. At an altitude of about 11,800 feet, 1,600 feet above the place where Jeffrey was last seen, they noticed something bright among the boulders, partially covered with snow. As they got closer, they discovered the body of a man lying between two large rocks. Nearby, on a flat boulder, was a neatly folded pile of clothing, an orange hunting jacket, a gray sweater, and a plaid shirt. Everything was folded neatly, as if the man had intended to return for them. Hiking boots stood a few feet away from the body, laces tied. The hikers immediately called the authorities on a satellite phone. By evening, an investigation team and a forensic expert were working at the scene. The body was identified as Jeffrey Storms. He was lying on his side in a fetal position, completely naked from the waist up, wearing only underwear and socks. The body was in a condition consistent with exposure to low temperatures for 5 days. According to the expert's assessment, death occurred approximately 3 to 4 days ago. The pathologist conducted a preliminary examination. No external injuries incompatible with life were found. There were no signs of animal attack or violent death. The body was taken to the morgue for a complete autopsy. The official cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. The internal organs showed signs characteristic of hypothermia: slowed metabolism, changes in the tissues of the heart and lungs. Blood tests revealed no alcohol or drugs. What puzzled everyone was that Jeffrey had taken off all his outer clothing and neatly folded it before his death. This phenomenon is known as paradoxical undressing, a symptom of the final stage of hypothermia. When a person's body temperature drops to a critically low level, the peripheral blood vessels suddenly dilate, sending warm blood to the extremities. This creates a feeling of intense, unbearable heat. Victims of hypothermia in this state often remove their clothes, believing that they are too hot, when in fact they are freezing to death. However, Jeffrey Storms was an experienced hunter. He had spent 30 years in the mountains, knew about the dangers of hypothermia, and knew the symptoms of hypothermia. Moreover, he was dressed in high-quality warm clothing and had a thermos of hot coffee and food with him. Friends confirmed that Jeffrey knew very well how to survive in extreme conditions. Another mystery is his rifle. A thorough search of the area around where his body was found didn't turn up the weapon. The rifle Jeffrey took with him on Saturday morning was gone. Search teams combed a half-mile radius. They checked crevices, looked under boulders, and combed through bushes. The rifle was never found. The investigation team attempted to reconstruct the events. The most likely scenario: when a sudden blizzard began, Jeffrey decided to return to base. However, in poor visibility, he became disoriented and started moving in the wrong direction. Instead of descending to the truck, he climbed up the slope. This is a common mistake in blizzard conditions. People lose their bearings and cannot tell which way is up. Jeffrey moved through the forest, crossed a rocky field. Perhaps this is where the dogs lost his trail, and continued climbing another 1,600 feet. By evening or night, after many hours of walking in the blizzard, wet and exhausted, Jeffrey began to experience symptoms of hypothermia. His body temperature was dropping. He found shelter between some boulders. In a state of progressive hypothermia, when the mind begins to cloud over, he experienced a paradoxical sensation of heat. Methodically, like an engineer accustomed to order, he took off his outer clothing, folded it neatly, took off his boots, and tied the laces. Then he lay down between the rocks and lost consciousness. Death came within a few hours. But this scenario did not explain some details. Why didn't Jeffrey fire into the air to signal for help? He had ammunition, and his rifle was working. His friends heard a shot in the morning. Where was the gun? Why did he climb upward, even though his compass should have been pointing in the right direction? Weather forecasters later studied the anomalous weather system that caused the sudden blizzard. They called it a local anomaly, a rare phenomenon in which a small area experiences extreme weather conditions. In contrast, the surrounding areas remain relatively calm. Such a system was not predicted by weather forecast models. It was a perfect storm in miniature. It formed quickly, was intense, but limited in area, the meteorologist explained. Jeffrey's wife was devastated. The funeral was held in Denver. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye. Colleagues, friends, members of the hunting club. Many remembered Jeffrey as a professional in his field, a caring father, and a loyal friend. His daughters talked about how their father taught them to love nature and respect the mountains. The two friends who were with Jeffrey that Saturday carried the burden of guilt for the rest of their lives. We should have stayed together. We shouldn't have split up that day. If we had been together when the blizzard started, we would have made it back together, one of them said at the memorial service. The story of Jeffrey Storms became a topic of discussion among survival experts. Several articles in specialized magazines analyzed the case, using it as an example of how even experienced people can fall victim to sudden weather changes. Recommendations were updated. Always stay together in a group when signs of bad weather appear. Use GPS navigators in addition to compasses, and carry emergency radio beacons. 26 years have passed since that October day. Jeffrey would now be 77 years old. His grandchildren, whom he never saw, have grown up. Life went on for his family, but questions remained. What happened to the rifle? Why did he climb up instead of going down? On 10th June 2003, little Kit Parkins, who had just turned 2, was playing in the yard of his grandfather's ranch near the town of Ritter in eastern Oregon. It was a typical summer evening in the countryside, warm, clear, and calm. The temperature was around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun was still high in the sky, even though it was approaching 6 in the evening. Grandfather's ranch was located in a valley surrounded by wooded hills and mountains. The area was open. A large yard with trimmed grass, several barns, and livestock fencing. The nearest neighbor was several miles away. It was the perfect place for a little boy to play under adult supervision. Kit's grandfather was mowing the grass on a tractor about 50 feet from where the boy was playing with his toy cars. Kit's mother, the ranch owner's daughter, was preparing dinner in the kitchen, periodically looking out the window to check on her son. Everything was under control. It was a normal, safe evening. At about 10 to 6, his grandfather looked back to check on his grandson. Kit was gone. The place where the boy had been playing a second ago was empty. Grandpa immediately stopped the tractor and began to look around. Kit often ran after butterflies or birds. Maybe he had just wandered a few yards away. Grandpa started to call out, "Kit! Kit! Where are you?" Silence. Only the wind in the grass and the distant mooing of cows. Grandpa ran to the house shouting. Kit's mother ran out of the kitchen. They began searching the yard, calling loudly for the boy. They checked the barns, the animal pens, every possible place a 2-year-old child could hide. Nothing. Kit was gone. 20 minutes later, the Grant County Sheriff was called. By 7 p.m., the first 3 officers had arrived at the ranch. They immediately organized a search of the area around the ranch. Every member of the family was questioned. Grandpa explained, "I turned away for a minute, maybe 2. When I looked back, he was gone. He just disappeared." Kit's mother was on the verge of hysteria. Her 2-year-old son was out there somewhere, alone, possibly frightened. Night was approaching. The temperature was expected to drop to 50 degrees. For a small child in light clothing, this was dangerous. By 8 o'clock in the evening, 20 people were working at the site. Sheriff's deputies, volunteers from neighboring ranches, friends of the family. They combed the area with powerful flashlights, calling the boy's name loudly. They checked the fields, the woods at the edge of the property, and the banks of a small stream. No sign of Kit. At dawn on 11th June, a full-scale search and rescue operation began. More than 150 volunteers from across the state arrived at the ranch. A Coast Guard helicopter started flying over the area. Horse patrols checked remote regions. The area within a 5-mile radius of the ranch was divided into sectors and systematically combed. By noon, 5 search dogs and their handlers had arrived. The dogs were given Kit's clothes from his room to sniff. All 5 dogs picked up a scent from the ranch yard. They led their handlers north, across a field of tall grass toward the woods. The trail was clear. Small footprints from Kit's children's sandals were visible in the soft earth. The dogs followed the trail confidently. After about a mile, when the field turned into forest, the trail continued. The dogs led the handlers through the trees, past boulders, up a slope. Then something changed. One of the dog handlers noticed something strange about the footprints. The trail became uneven. The distance between the prints increased. For a 2-year-old child with a stride length of about a foot, the prints were suddenly 3 to 4 feet apart. "It looks as if the child started jumping or running with huge strides," one of the dog handlers explained to the investigation team. "But that's physically impossible for a 2-year-old. His legs are too short for such jumps." Another oddity was that the trail would sometimes disappear for dozens of yards, then reappear further on, as if the child had flown over the ground, or someone had carried him and then put him down. The dogs continued to lead the team up the slope. The terrain became increasingly difficult to traverse. Steep sections, thick undergrowth, boulders. It was a challenging route for an adult. For a 2-year-old child, it was virtually impossible. After several hours, the group with the dogs reached an altitude of about 6,800 feet. They were about 8 miles from the ranch. Here, on a rocky section, small footprints were found, children's footprints on the damp ground between the rocks. Analysis showed that these were Kit's footprints. How did a 2-year-old child walk 8 miles through mountainous terrain overnight? An adult in good physical shape would have covered that distance in a few hours. A 2-year-old child, slow, with short legs, unfamiliar with the terrain, could not physically have covered such a distance, primarily through woods and mountains. The trail continued further, even higher up the slope. The dogs tirelessly led the team. By noon, they had climbed even higher, to 7,200 feet. Here, under a large tree on the mountainside, a hunter who had joined the search found Kit. The boy was sitting with his back against the tree trunk, wet from the morning dew, shivering from the cold but alive. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing when he disappeared, a t-shirt and shorts, but his sandals were gone. His feet were almost clean, with only a few minor scratches. There were no severe cuts, bruises, or injuries that one would expect after a 12-mile journey barefoot over rocky mountain terrain. The hunter immediately picked up the boy and began to descend, where he was met by a rescue team. Kit was taken by helicopter to the nearest hospital for a medical examination. The doctors were puzzled. Kit was dehydrated, hypothermic, and exhausted, but he had no serious injuries. His feet were virtually unscathed, a few scratches, minor abrasions, but nothing serious. No deep cuts that one would expect after walking barefoot for 12 miles over rocks, roots, and sharp branches. No broken bones, no signs of animal attacks. The boy was simply exhausted, but otherwise healthy. He was warmed up, given fluids and food. By evening, Kit was sleeping in a hospital bed, and his mother never left his side. She couldn't believe her son was alive. The doctor said it was a miracle. One more night on the mountain, and the outcome could have been tragic. The next day, when Kit came to, his mother asked him gently, "Kitty, what happened? Where did you go?" The boy, still weak but able to speak, replied, "A big teddy bear called me. I went with him. He carried me." His mother decided that her son had simply had a dream, or hallucinated from fear and cold. But Kit kept repeating the story. A psychologist who worked with traumatized children was called in to assess the boy's condition. The psychologist conducted several sessions with Kit over the next few days. The boy consistently told the same story. A big furry bear came to him in the yard while he was playing. The bear was kind, not scary. He asked Kit to go with him. Kit went. The bear carried him on its back through the forest and over the mountains. It was dark and cold, but the bear was warm. In the morning, the bear put Kit under a tree and left. The psychologist noted that the details of the story did not change, a sign that the child either really experienced what he was describing or had created a very stable fantasy. 2-year-olds have active imaginations, but their stories usually change every time they tell them. Kit's story remained identical. The investigation team considered various versions. The most logical was that Kit had actually seen an animal, possibly a bear or a large dog, and followed it. Animals sometimes pass through the ranch in search of food. The boy may have been curious and followed the animal into the forest, but that didn't explain how he walked 12 miles across 2 mountain ranges. Child development experts explained that a 2-year-old is physically incapable of walking that distance on his own. The maximum a child of that age can walk is a mile, and that's on flat ground, after which he will get tired and stop. Another version. Someone picked up the boy and carried him most of the way, then left him under a tree. But who? And why? There were no suspicious persons in the area. All neighbors and visitors to the ranch were checked. No criminal motives were found. Biologists were consulted about bear behavior. Black bears inhabit this region of Oregon. However, bears avoid people, boisterous small children. Cases where a bear has interacted with a child without causing harm are sporadic. The idea that a bear carried the child for 12 miles was rejected as biologically impossible. Bears do not exhibit such behavior. The mystery of the footprints remained. How could the enlarged stride be explained? Why did the footprints sometimes disappear and then reappear? Footprint experts could not provide a definitive answer. One theory was that if someone or something had indeed carried the child, periodically setting him down on the ground, the footprints would look exactly like that. The absence of shoes was also strange. Kit's sandals were never found, despite a thorough search along the entire route. Usually, if a child loses their boots, they are found somewhere along the way, but the sandals were nowhere to be seen. Kit grew up, became a teenager, then a young man. His story became known in the narrow circles of enthusiasts of mysterious events. Journalists periodically contacted the family. Kit's mother always gave the same answer. "My son is alive. That's the main thing. How he ended up on that mountain, I don't know. Maybe it was a miracle. Maybe it was a guardian angel in the form of a bear. I am grateful every day." Kit himself, as an adult, continued to remember that night. In an interview given at the age of 20, he said, "I know how it sounds. I know people think it's a child's fantasy, but I remember. I remember the furry back, the warmth, the smell of the forest. I remember being carried. It's as real to me as any other childhood memory." Psychologists who studied the case years later offered various explanations. One theory is that Kit actually followed an animal, perhaps a large dog, which his 2-year-old mind interpreted as a teddy bear. The dog may have belonged to a hunter or a resident of a remote mountain hut. Keith followed the dog, and the dog instinctively led him. Then the hunter or dog owner found the child, carried him most of the way up the mountain for some unknown reason, then left him under a tree and called the search and rescue services anonymously. But this version had weaknesses. No anonymous calls were made. No one came forward to explain what had happened. And why would someone carry a child up a mountain instead of returning him to the ranch? The story of Kit Parkins remains one of the most mysterious cases of missing children. 22 years have passed since that June evening. Keith is now a 24-year-old man living in everyday life. But questions remain. What happened that night? How did a 2-year-old boy walk 12 miles through the mountains? Who or what carried him? Was it really a bear, as Keith claims, or something we cannot explain? Nature provides no answers. The mountains of Oregon keep their secrets. And sometimes, those secrets include miracles beyond our understanding. In the spring of 2004, German theoretical physicist Reinhard Kirchner arrived in the United States, first to attend a scientific conference and then for a personal trip to the southwestern part of the country. Kirchner was a man with a strong research interest in natural anomalies, especially little-studied geological and magnetic phenomena. Colleagues noted his penchant for unconventional topics, his confident command of English, and his exceptional independence on expeditions. After successful days in the academic environment, Reinhard decided to spend his vacation near the Grand Escalante National Monument in Utah, known for its unique canyons and strange geological formations. He booked a campsite for 2 days, and the payment was confirmed by a receipt. This was typical for people coming to explore the area, especially during the off-season. On Thursday, 18 March, his colleagues at the university began to worry when Kirchner unexpectedly failed to show up for an online meeting. All day long, he did not respond to his wife's or colleagues' messages. By evening, his wife called the American police from Germany and demanded that they check on the situation. The next day, rangers, having received the request, quickly found Reinhard's truck in the parking lot at Calf Creek Falls Trail, a popular route for geologists and nature lovers. The car was locked and no keys were found. Inside were his backpack, GPS navigator, topographic maps, wallet, and passport. Everything he needed for an independent outing, but no keys or any notes about his route. It seemed as if he had simply left with just the bare essentials. An extensive search operation began immediately. For 2 days, volunteers, rangers, and professional searchers combed the main trails and canyons. But on 20th of March, the region was hit by abnormal hurricane-force winds. Gusts of up to 50 miles per hour made it impossible for helicopters and ground teams to work. The weather system was not predicted by forecasters, and such a localized storm was considered unusual even for the desert areas of Utah. For 3 days, the storm prevented the search from resuming. When the wind died down, specialists surveyed every accessible area, used dogs and thermal imaging cameras, and questioned the few tourists passing through Calf Creek during those days. However, no traces of Kirchner, no clothing, no equipment, no body, were found. A month later, the search operation was officially called off. Reinhard's wife flew to Utah, where she studied the case files in detail, personally reviewed the routes and campsite details, and interviewed park employees. All attempts to find new information were unsuccessful. Adding to the mystery of this story were the words of Kirchner's colleagues, who noted his interest in unusual magnetic anomalies in the Escalante area before his disappearance. Reinhard did not share any details or specify exactly what he wanted to investigate beyond the standard routes. He was a man of science, not interested in mysticism. Still, his open curiosity about rare physical phenomena sparked numerous speculations. No one knows what happened to the physicist. Among the assumptions are an accident, human error, the possibility of disorientation during extreme weather conditions, and the possibility that the cause was the study of real magnetic or geological anomalies that affected his orientation or mental state. The Escalante area is known for its complex terrain and extreme weather, where even an experienced geologist or physicist can get lost and not find their way back. The Kirchner family returns to the subject of his disappearance every year, and colleagues continue to review field research methods in rugged terrain. The story remains an unsolved mystery of one of the most enigmatic disappearances of scientists in the United States. These 3 cases were officially closed many years ago. No one found Jeffrey Storm's rifle, Keith Parkin's sandals, or Reinhard Kirchner himself. The investigation came to conclusions that satisfied everyone on paper, but no one in reality. The items disappeared, the people either died or vanished without a trace, and the explanations remained at the level of, "That's how it is in the mountains." More than 20 years have passed since then. The mountains have not changed. Sudden blizzards, strange winds, and silence that even dogs refuse to walk in still occur there. And everyone who works in search and rescue services in the western states knows that if even one of these details appears in a report, dogs howling and refusing to go further, tracks ending on rocks, or a child found in an impossible place, it's better to close the case quickly and not dig deeper. Because there will be no answers anyway. That's all, friends. Write your opinions in the comments and see you in new videos. Bye for now. People disappear in the mountains every year, but sometimes cases defy explanation. A man who returned after 2 years, convinced that only 4 days had passed, a tourist who disappeared in a minute on an open trail, and a teacher who vanished from a crowded observation deck, only to be found years later in a completely different place. These stories are not about accidents. They are about mysteries that neither investigators nor scientists have been able to solve. If you are interested in such mystical disappearances, subscribe so you don't miss new investigations. Now, let's take a look at 3 of the most inexplicable cases that will give you goosebumps. On 14th of August 1989, 33-year-old Thomas Gordon, a surveyor from Salt Lake City, set out on a solo hike in the Wind River Range in Bridger-Teton National Forest, Wyoming. Thomas was an experienced hiker with 10 years of experience hiking in the Rocky Mountains. He carefully planned each expedition, studied topographic maps, checked the weather forecast, and always left a detailed itinerary at the ranger station. On that August day, the weather was perfect for hiking. The temperature was around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, the sky was clear, and there was a light breeze. Thomas registered at the ranger station in the morning and left his exact route. He planned to climb to about 10,000 feet through a series of alpine meadows and granite fields, then return in 3 days. The ranger recorded the information and wished him luck. Everything was standard. Thomas loaded his backpack with the necessary equipment: a tent, a sleeping bag, 5 days' worth of food, a camping stove, maps, a compass, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. On his wrist was a reliable mechanical watch, a simple model without electronics that he had worn for years. He set off on his route around 9 in the morning. 3 days passed. On 17th August, when Thomas did not return by the appointed time, the rangers began to worry. By evening, a preliminary check was organized. Perhaps he had simply delayed for a day, deciding to explore an additional area. By noon on 18th August, when Thomas still hadn't shown up, a full-scale search operation began. 2 search dogs with handlers were brought in on 19th August. The dogs were given Thomas's clothes from his car, parked at the trailhead, to sniff. Both dogs picked up the scent and confidently led the team along the route Thomas had indicated. The trail led through the forest, up the slope, across alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers. At an altitude of about 10,400 feet, where the forest ended and a vast granite field began, an area of bare rock several acres in size, the dogs stopped. They sniffed the edge of the granite field, circled around, and tried to pick up the trail again. But the trail disappeared on the rock. All attempts to direct the dogs around the granite field to find the trail on the other side were unsuccessful. The search operation was expanded. By the end of the week, 50 rangers and volunteers were working on site, combing the area within a 10-mile radius of the granite field. Helicopters flew over the mountains, checking remote canyons and hard-to-reach areas. Climbers surveyed steep slopes and crevasses. Every square foot was thoroughly checked. 2 weeks of intensive searching yielded no results. No clothes, no equipment, no traces of Thomas. It was as if he had vanished into thin air on that granite field. By the end of August, the official search operation was called off. The case remained open, but there were no leads. Thomas's wife, parents, and friends did not give up hope. They organized private searches every weekend for the next few months. They checked remote areas and hired professional searchers. A reward of $20,000 was offered for information, but months turned into a year, and hope slowly faded. A year later, in August 1990, Thomas Gordon was officially declared dead. The family held a memorial service, even though there was no body. Life went on, but questions remained. On 22nd September 1991, exactly 2 years and 39 days after Thomas's disappearance, a group of 4 hikers was trekking through a remote section of forest about 47 miles north of where Thomas had disappeared, near the Montana border. It was a remote area where people rarely ventured. Around noon, the hikers noticed a man strolling toward them on the trail. He moved slowly and unsteadily, as if disoriented. As he got closer, it became clear that the man was in poor condition, emaciated with a long beard and wearing dirty and torn clothes. The tourist called out to him. The man stopped and looked at them with a hazy gaze. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" one of the tourists asked. The man nodded, but did not seem to understand where he was. The tourists gave him water and food. He drank greedily, like a man who had not drunk for a long time. "What's your name? What happened to you?" the tourist asked. Thomas Gordon," he croaked. One of the tourists remembered that name. 2 years ago, there were news reports about an engineer from Salt Lake City who disappeared in the Wind River Range. Could it be him? Thomas was taken by helicopter to the nearest hospital. The doctors conducted a preliminary examination. He was severely dehydrated, emaciated, and weighed about 30 pounds less than his normal weight. However, there were no serious injuries, no fractures, deep cuts, or signs of animal attacks. Just extreme exhaustion and dehydration. Thomas's family was notified immediately. His wife flew to Wyoming that same night. When she entered the room and saw her husband, alive, though emaciated, she couldn't believe her eyes. Tears, hugs, and questions with no answers. When Thomas regained enough consciousness to speak coherently, he insisted on something impossible. "I don't understand what's going on. Why are you all talking about 2 years? It's only been 4 days since I started my hike." 4 days, not 2 years. His wife explained that today was 22nd of September 1991. He had disappeared on 14th August 1989. 2 years and 39 days had passed. Thomas looked at her with incomprehension and fear. "That's impossible. I remember starting the hike on Monday morning. I was climbing up to the granite field. Was that yesterday? The day before yesterday? Not 2 years ago." The doctors conducted a thorough medical examination. The results were shocking. Biologically, Thomas's body showed signs of starvation for about 5 to 6 days, no more. Weight loss, dehydration, muscle wasting. Everything was consistent with a person who had spent about a week without sufficient food and water. But not 2 years. His beard had grown for about a month, maybe a little more. Not 2 years. His hair was longer, but again it had grown for about a month, not 2 years. His fingernails and toenails also showed about a month's growth. Thomas's clothes were worn, torn, and dirty, but not as much as one would expect after 2 years in the wild. His hiking boots were in surprisingly good condition. The soles were moderately worn, the seams intact. Boots worn for 2 years in mountainous terrain would have looked entirely different. The strangest detail was the watch on his wrist. The mechanical watch that Thomas had worn for years had stopped. The hands were frozen at 12:47. The date on the dial was 14th August 1989, the day he disappeared. The investigation team questioned Thomas repeatedly. His story remained unchanged. He remembered starting his hike on the morning of 14th August. He remembered climbing the trail, enjoying the views. Around noon, he reached a granite field at an altitude of about 10,400 feet. "I stopped to rest and drink some water," Thomas said. "I sat on a large flat rock and surveyed the area. Everything was normal. Then I felt a strange dizziness. It wasn't like altitude sickness. I'm used to high altitudes. It was something else. The air seemed to vibrate. I heard a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Thomas continued, I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The dizziness got worse. Everything around me began to blur, as if I were looking through water. Then darkness. I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember is waking up on some kind of trail. It was morning. The sun was just rising. I was lying on the ground. My backpack was next to me. My head hurt. My mouth was dry. I thought I had fallen and hit my head, losing consciousness for the night. I got up and looked around. The area looked unfamiliar. I didn't recognize the place. I started walking along the trail, hoping to come across some familiar landmarks. I walked for a day, 2, 3. I ran out of food. I ran out of water. I began to realize that I was seriously lost. Then I met those tourists. I thought 4, maybe 5 days had passed, not 2 years. Psychologists conducted a series of tests: lie detector, cognitive assessments, checks for mental disorders. The results were precise. Thomas was not lying. He sincerely believed what he was saying. There were no signs of deception, schizophrenia, or dissociative disorders. His memory of events before his disappearance was clear, detailed, and consistent. Amnesia experts were consulted. Perhaps Thomas had suffered a severe head injury that caused retrograde amnesia, a loss of memory of events that occurred after a certain point in time. He could have survived 2 years in the wild, then suffered an injury, erased his memory, and created a false memory that only a few days had passed. But this theory did not explain the biological data. Thomas's body showed no signs of survival for 2 years in the wild. It did not explain the stopped watches. It did not explain the condition of his clothes and shoes. Another version was that Thomas had been somewhere in civilization all this time, possibly suffering from amnesia, then returned to the mountains shortly before he was found. Investigators checked this version. Thomas's bank account showed no activity for 2 years. His credit cards had not been used. No one saw him in any city, at any gas station, or in any store. If he was somewhere in civilization for 2 years, how did he survive without money or documents? Physicists and meteorologists were consulted about the air vibrations and rumbling that Thomas described. Could it have been some kind of natural phenomenon? An earthquake? An atmospheric anomaly? Seismic station records for 14th August 1989 showed no activity in the Wind River Range region. Meteorological data was also normal. No abnormal phenomena were recorded. The rangers returned to the granite field where the search dogs had lost Thomas's trail 2 years earlier. They conducted a detailed survey of the area. They checked their compasses. Perhaps a magnetic anomaly had caused disorientation. The compasses were working normally. No anomalies were found. Thomas Gordon's story became a media sensation. Journalists from all over the country came to interview him. Headlines screamed about time portals, paranormal phenomena, and the Wyoming mystery. Thomas avoided most interviews. He wanted to return to everyday life, but it was impossible. A few months later, when the hype had died down a bit, Thomas returned to Salt Lake City. He tried to rebuild his life, but everything had changed in 2 years. His job had been given to someone else. His friends thought he was dead. Then he suddenly returned, but he didn't remember the last 2 years. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with curiosity, and still others with fear. Thomas and his wife eventually divorced. She loved him, but she couldn't cope with the strangeness of the situation, with the constant questions, with the fact that her husband had lost 2 years of his life and couldn't explain how. The case was officially closed as unexplained. The investigation team wrote in their report, Thomas Gordon was found alive on September 22, 1991, 2 years and 39 days after his disappearance. Medical and physical evidence does not correspond to the period of his absence. There is no explanation. The case is closed without resolution. Thomas spent the rest of his life trying to understand what had happened to him. He kept a diary, recording every detail of his memories of that day on the granite field. He tried to find a scientific explanation. He read books on physics, quantum mechanics, and relativity. Maybe somewhere in those equations was the answer. Years later, in an interview with a small scientific journal, Thomas said, "I don't know what happened on that granite field. I don't know where I was for 2 years. All I know is that 4 days passed for me, no more. My body, my watch, my memory, everything says 4 days. But the calendar says 2 years. Where is the truth? I spent 20 years trying to find the answer. There is none." Thomas Gordon died in 2011 of natural causes. The story of his lost 2 years remains one of the most mysterious and inexplicable in the annals of disappearances in national parks. Scientists who studied the case found no rational explanation. Skeptics claimed that Thomas was lying or suffering from mental illness, although all tests showed the opposite. Believers spoke of a miracle or supernatural intervention. The granite field, at an altitude of 10,400 feet in the Wind River Range, remains an ordinary place. Tourists pass through there regularly. No one else has reported strange vibrations or humming. No one else has disappeared in such an inexplicable way. But some tourists who know the story give the place a wide berth, preferring not to take any chances. What happened to Thomas Gordon on 14th August 1989 at 12:47 p.m.? Where was he for 2 years? Or was it 4 days as he claimed? Nature provides no answers. Some mysteries may not be revealed. There are places in the endless mountains of Wyoming where time flows differently, or where time does not exist at all. We will never know for sure. On 3rd of October 1993, 26-year-old Sarah Hollis and her friend Brian Marks set out on a day hike up Old Rag Mountain in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. It is one of the most popular trails in the park, a scenic route with technical rock climbing sections that lead to a summit at about 3,200 feet. The weather was perfect for hiking: clear October skies, a temperature of about 60 degrees, and a light breeze. Sarah worked as a graphic designer in Washington, D.C. Brian was a programmer at the same company. They had been friends for several years and regularly went hiking on weekends. Both were in good physical shape and had experience hiking in the mountains. They were familiar with Old Rag Mountain, having climbed it twice in the past year. On the morning of 3rd in October, they arrived at the trailhead around 9 a.m. They signed the visitor log, leaving information about their route and planned return time. They loaded their backpacks with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and maps. Sarah took her camera. She loved to photograph landscapes. The climb took about 3 hours. The route was moderately complex. Through the forest, then across open rocky areas where they had to climb using their hands. For experienced hikers, it was a pleasant adventure. Not extreme, but interesting enough. Around noon, they reached the summit. The view was breathtaking. The Shenandoah Valley stretched out below, covered in the autumn colors of the forest. Sarah took several photos. They sat at the top for about 20 minutes, enjoying the views, snacking, and resting. Around 12:30, they began their descent. The route down followed the same trail. On narrow sections, it is customary to walk single file. Brian, as the more experienced climber, led the way with Sarah following about 65 feet behind. The standard safe distance. They periodically called out to each other to check that everything was okay. At about 1:15 p.m., 45 minutes after beginning their descent, they passed through an open section of the trail. It was a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. The trail here was relatively wide, about 3 feet, with no technical difficulties. It was just a rocky path running along the slope. Brian stopped at a rocky outcrop to admire the view. He stood with his back to the trail, looking down at the valley below. Sarah should have been about 65 feet behind him. Brian later swore that he had stood there for no more than 40 or 45 seconds, a minute at most. When he turned around, intending to call out to Sarah and show her the breathtaking view, she was gone. The trail behind him was empty. Brian thought Sarah had fallen behind a little more than he thought. He walked back down the trail a few dozen feet, calling out, "Sarah, where are you?" Silence. Only the wind in the trees and the distant cry of a bird. Brian began to worry. He walked further back along the trail to where they had come from. The area was open. He could see the trail for several hundred feet in both directions. No one. Sarah couldn't have gotten far in a minute, even if she had run, which would have been strange and dangerous on a mountain trail. She couldn't have disappeared from view in such a short time. Brian began to shout louder, "Sarah! Sarah!" His voice echoed off the rocks. No answer. Panic started to set in. He ran back along the trail, checking every turn, every ledge. Maybe Sarah had slipped, fallen, hit her head, and was lying unconscious somewhere off the trail. Brian began searching the area around the trail. He climbed down a few feet down the slope, looked between the boulders, and checked every place where a person could lie. He shouted until he was hoarse. Nothing. Sarah was gone. Brian spent the next half hour searching desperately. He walked back and forth along the trail several times. He searched every possible place within a 330-foot radius. He checked the edge of the cliff. Maybe Sarah had gotten too close to the edge, lost her balance, and fallen. But the edge was far from the trail, and there were no traces, no footprints, broken branches, disturbed earth. Brian realized he had to go down and call for help. He quickly began to descend toward the ranger station. The descent took about an hour and a half. He practically ran, risking his own safety. By 3:30, he burst into the ranger station, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with panic. "My girlfriend is missing! She was on the trail 65 feet behind me. I turned away for a minute and she was gone. We have to go back and find her." The ranger immediately organized a preliminary search party. By 5 p.m., 6 rangers and volunteers had climbed to the spot Brian had indicated. They began searching the area. They shouted Sarah's name. They checked every section. The sun was setting. The light was fading. By 7 p.m., it was dark. The search was suspended until morning. It was dangerous to work on mountain trails at night. Brian spent the night at the ranger station, unable to sleep. Guilt and fear tormented him. Where was Sarah? What had happened to her? Why had he turned away? Why hadn't he checked to see if she was still there? At dawn, a full-scale search operation began. More than 300 volunteers, rangers from various parks, police, volunteers from local search and rescue services, and Sarah's friends and colleagues from Washington arrived at the park. The area was divided into sectors. Each sector was thoroughly combed. A helicopter flew over the area, looking for any signs: bright clothing, a backpack, a person. Climbers descended all accessible cliffs, checking crevices and ledges. Divers searched the streams and small pools in the valley below. Perhaps Sarah had somehow fallen and been carried away by the water. On the second day, 6 search dogs and their handlers were brought in. The dogs were given Sarah's clothes from her car in the parking lot to sniff. All 6 dogs picked up her scent from where Brian had last seen her. The trail led down the path, in the direction of the descent, for about 200 feet. Then the trail turned sharply to the left, away from the path, toward the edge of the cliff. The dogs led their handlers through the brush and rocks straight to the edge. At the very edge, all 6 dogs stopped. They began to whine, long, mournful whines. They refused to go any closer. Their handlers tried to direct the dogs further, but the animals categorically refused to go. One of the dog handlers explained, "The trail is clear. She was walking here toward the cliff. The trail ends at the edge. Either she jumped or she fell. But the dogs are afraid. They don't want to go near it. I've seen this behavior before, usually when they smell death." Rescue climbers descended the cliff. The height was about 150 feet, not a sheer wall, but a steep slope with ledges and boulders. If Sarah had fallen, she should have been lying somewhere below. The team methodically searched the entire slope. They checked every ledge, every crevice, every spot where a body could get stuck. Nothing was found. Nobody. No clothes, no backpack, no camera. Nothing. Down below, in the canyon at the foot of the cliff, another team searched the area. They checked between the boulders, under fallen trees, in overgrown areas. They walked along the stream, checking the water and the banks. 4 days of intensive searching yielded no results. The investigation team questioned Brian repeatedly. His story remained unchanged. He had his back to the trail for a minute at most. When he turned around, Sarah was gone. He didn't hear any screams, sounds of a fall, or anything unusual. Just silence. The lie detector showed that Brian was telling the truth. The psychological evaluation revealed no signs of deception or mental disorder. He genuinely did not understand what had happened to Sarah. His grief was real. The accident theory was the most likely. Experts speculated that Sarah had strayed from the trail to the edge of the cliff for some reason. Perhaps she saw something interesting and wanted to take a picture of the view. She got too close to the edge, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she fell. But that didn't explain why her body hadn't been found. The cliff had been thoroughly searched. If she had lost, she should have been found. Another version was that Sarah had left voluntarily. Perhaps she was suffering from depression that no one knew about. Maybe she decided to end her life by jumping off the cliff, and her body was carried away somehow. But Sarah's loved ones rejected this version. She was a happy person, loved life, and had no problems that could lead to suicide. And again, where was the body? A criminal theory was also investigated. Perhaps someone was on the trail, attacked Sarah, and carried her body away. But all the other tourists who registered at the park that day were interviewed and checked. No one was in the area at the critical time. And how could someone have carried an adult woman off a mountain trail in 1 minute without being noticed by Brian, who was only 65 feet away? After 2 weeks, the official search operation was called off. Sarah's family organized a private search that lasted for months. They hired professional searchers, dogs, and even psychics. A $50,000 reward was offered. Nothing. Sarah Hollis was never found. The case remains open as an unexplained disappearance. Brian never recovered from that day. He quit his job and moved away from Washington. For years, he was haunted by nightmares. He would see Sarah walking behind him on the trail, then she would disappear. He would wake up in a cold sweat, screaming her name. In an interview several years later, Brian said, "I spent thousands of hours trying to figure out what happened. I turned away for less than a minute. The trail was open, visibility was good. It's physically impossible to get very far in such a short time. I checked every possible place. She just disappeared, as if she vanished into thin air." Paranormal theories also arose. Some spoke of time anomalies, portals, and abductions. Skeptics dismissed such ideas as fantasy, but for Sarah's family, the explanation doesn't matter. They just want to know what happened to her. They want to find her, give her a proper burial, and find peace. 32 years have passed since that October day. Sarah would now be 58 years old. She may have a family, children, and a career. Instead, she became another statistic, another name on a long list of people who disappeared into the American wilderness without a trace, without explanation, without answers. On 26th of June 1987, 44-year-old Michael Fitzpatrick, a history teacher from Portland, Oregon, arrived at Crater Lake National Park for a weekend with his wife, Dorothy. It was their annual ritual to spend a few days each summer in the park, admiring the deepest lake in the United States. Michael had been teaching American history in high school for 20 years and was a calm, methodical man who loved nature and photography. The couple stayed at Mazama Campground at an elevation of about 6,000 feet. The weather was perfect. Late June, clear skies, and a temperature of around 70 degrees. On Saturday morning, They decided to drive along Rim Drive. This scenic road circles the lake at an elevation of 7,000 feet, offering breathtaking views of the crater and deep blue water. Around 11 a.m., the couple parked at Watchman Overlook, one of the most popular viewing points in the park. There were a few other tourists at the overlook, families with children, a couple of elderly people, a total of 8 people not counting the Fitzpatricks. Michael got out of the car first. "I'm going to go take a look at the view and take a couple of pictures," he told his wife. Dorothy stayed in the car, taking the camera out of the bag on the back seat. Michael walked to the railing, about 30 feet from the parking lot. Dorothy later explained, "I was looking for the camera in the bag. There were a lot of things in there: snacks, water bottles, maps. It took me maybe 2 minutes to find it. No more. When I got out of the car with the camera, I expected to see Michael at the railing, but he wasn't there." She walked to the railing. Below her was a huge drop, about 1,000 feet to the surface of the lake. The deep blue water glistened below. "Michael!" she shouted. Only an echo bounced off the limestone cliffs. "Michael, where are you?" Dorothy began to look around. Maybe he had walked to the other side of the platform, to another viewing point. She walked around. Several tourists looked at her curiously. "Excuse me, have you seen my husband? He's tall, wearing a blue shirt, and was just here at the railing." One man replied, "I saw a man who came up to the fence a few minutes ago. I was distracted by the children for just a second. When I looked back, he was gone. I thought he had gone back to the car." Dorothy ran back to their car. Michael wasn't there. The car was empty. His belongings, a backpack, a bottle of water, a hat, were lying on the passenger seat. Panic began to set in. Where was he? She returned to the railing and looked down at the cliff. A terrible thought struck her. Could he have fallen? But the railing was sturdy, about 3 feet high. To fall over it, you would have to deliberately climb over it or take a bad step. Michael was a cautious person. He wouldn't take risks. Dorothy asked the other tourists at the overlook. No one had seen where the man in the blue shirt had gone. One said he had seen him at the railing, then got distracted. Another woman didn't remember a man in a blue shirt at all. Everyone was busy with their own things, taking pictures, looking at the lake. 20 minutes later, Dorothy drove to the nearest ranger station. By noon, 2 rangers had arrived at Watchman Overlook. They immediately began a search. They checked the entire observation deck and the trails leading from it. They descended a little way down the slope, checking to see if the man was lying unconscious somewhere below. By evening, 10 rangers were working at the site. They searched the area within a mile radius of the lookout. They checked all the trails, all the places a person could have gone on foot. They shouted Michael's name. Nothing. The next day, a full-scale search operation was organized. 4 search dogs with handlers were brought to the site. The dogs were given Michael's shirt from his belongings in the car to sniff. All 4 dogs approached the spot at the fence where Michael was last seen, and all 4 dogs refused to work. They sniffed the fence, looked down at the cliff, and began to whine. One German shepherd suddenly began to howl long and plaintively. The others backed away from the fence, tails tucked between their legs. All attempts by the handlers to direct the dogs along the trail were unsuccessful. One of the dog handlers explained, "They clearly sensed something at the fence, but they refused to continue. This behavior is usually when they smell death or something that frightens them." A team of climbers descended the cliff to the lake. They checked every ledge and crevice where a body could be stuck. They reached the water and searched the shore. Nothing was found. Divers searched the bottom of the lake in the area directly below Watchman Overlook. Crater Lake is 1,949 feet deep, the deepest in the United States. The water is cold and clear. Visibility is good to 100 feet. Divers checked the bottom within a 500-foot radius of the point directly below the overlook. There was no body. Helicopters flew over the park. More than 400 volunteers combed the woods around the lake. All trails within a 10-mile radius were checked. Every day, search teams searched new areas. 12 days of intensive searching yielded no results. The investigation team interviewed all the tourists who were at the observation deck that morning. Their stories were similar. No one saw where Michael went. One witness said he saw him at the fence, then looked away for just a second, and when he looked back, the man was gone. Dorothy was questioned repeatedly. Maybe Michael had reasons to disappear? Problems in his marriage? Financial difficulties? Depression? Dorothy categorically denied this. Their marriage was happy. They were financially stable. Michael loved his job, his students, and his life. He had no reason to disappear or harm himself. The accident theory seemed the most likely. Perhaps Michael had climbed over the railing to get a better photo, lost his footing, and fallen. But rescuers thoroughly searched the entire slope below the observation deck. There was no body. If he had fallen into the water, divers should have found the body at the bottom. There are no currents in the lake. It is a closed volcanic crater filled with rain and snow water. After 2 weeks, the official search operation was called off. The family organized a private search that lasted for months. Dorothy couldn't come to terms with the loss. Every weekend she went to the park, searching the same places over and over again. In the fall of 1989, 2 years and 3 months after Michael's disappearance, a group of hikers was walking along the lake shore on the opposite side of Watchman Overlook, about 8 miles away. It was a remote, difficult-to-access area where people rarely ventured. Among the boulders on the shore, they discovered human bones, a skull, several ribs and leg bones. The authorities were notified immediately. Forensic examination and DNA analysis took several weeks. The results confirmed that the remains were those of Michael Fitzpatrick. The pathologist was unable to determine the cause of death due to the condition of the remains. 2 years in the elements, rain, snow, animals, had left only bones. There were no signs of trauma that would indicate a violent death or a fall from a great height. The bones were just bones. The investigation team attempted to reconstruct the events. How did Michael's body end up on the opposite side of a vast lake, 8 miles from the place of his disappearance? Several theories were proposed. First, Michael somehow left the lookout on foot, walked around the lake, and died on the other side from natural causes or an accident. But that would have required walking about 16 miles across rough terrain. Why? And why didn't he tell his wife? And why did the search dogs lead to the cliff, not away from it? The second theory, Michael fell into the water from Watchman Overlook, drowned, and his body was carried by underwater currents to the opposite shore. But hydrologists who studied the lake found no significant currents. It is a closed crater. The water is relatively calm. Even if there had been a current, the body would not have traveled 8 miles along the bottom in 2 years and then somehow ended up on the shore. The third theory, someone killed Michael, moved the body to the opposite side of the lake, and left it there. But why? Michael had no enemies. There was no motive for murder. And how could the killer carry the body of an adult man 8 miles across mountainous terrain without being noticed? The mystery remained unsolved. How did the bones appear only 2 years later in a place that had been searched repeatedly during the initial search? Search teams checked the entire shore of the lake. If the body had been there from the beginning, they should have found it. Dorothy buried her husband's remains. The ceremony was quiet and modest. She never got answers to her questions. How did Michael disappear in 2 minutes from an open observation deck? How did his body end up 8 miles away? Why did the bones only appear 2 years later? The story of Michael Fitzpatrick has become one of the many mysteries of Crater Lake. Local rangers say the lake has a strange atmosphere. Some tourists report inexplicable sensations, dizziness, disorientation, at specific lookout points. Native Americans considered the lake a sacred and dangerous place where spirits dwell in the depths. 38 years have passed since that June day. Watchman Overlook remains a popular viewing platform. thousands of tourists visit it every summer. Most are unaware of Michael Fitzpatrick's story, but those who know approach the railing with a special feeling, a mixture of awe and fear of the deep blue water below, which keeps its secrets as deep as the 49 feet of its bottom. That's all, friends. If you found this interesting, give it a thumbs up, write your opinion in the comments, and see you in new videos. Bye for now.